have another fantastic guest who decided to join, Brian Berletic. Brian, thank you for this. I appreciate it.
My sincere apologies for disappearing there. I normally never do that. I have no idea.
You're rock solid.
Yesterday I was working, and then I was like, today I think it's just a day off, right? And then I was sitting down. I was like, I'm supposed to be somewhere right now. And I checked, and you were like, "Where are you?" And my sincere apologies to you and your audience.
Oh man, I was drowning. I was drowning. And sometimes I've been at the radio station where I remember the worst day was when 2 guests didn't show up, and you have to cover for that. And it was like, it sucked. The last guest who was supposed to come on, let's say at like, I don't know, 9:30, and the guy called out at like 9:28. It's like, motherfucker. I was like, you motherfucker. Those are that I think was the worst day, maybe one or 2 of the worst days on the radio station. Because you have to keep the show going. It's like the show ends at 10. And so it doesn't really matter what happens over the course of the show. It ends at 10. So if you have to be by yourself and cover it, you got to be by yourself and cover it. It's just wow. But no, man, I appreciate you joining me. I really do. Honestly, do. I always appreciate you. My audience loves you to death. So thank you for joining me. You mentioned something that I thought was funny, and I didn't believe it until I looked further into it. You said that there are some people who believe that the United States is repositioning against China, effectively believing that the U.S. is trying to make deals with China, saying, hey, let's be buddies. Let's. And by the way, the U.S. was openly doing this at one point, saying, hey, let's be buddies to go against the Russians. It is like, what? And then they would say, hey, let's be buddies and go against the Chinese. And people like me were like, okay, you're out of your mind. Do you honestly believe that Russia or China is going to accept this quote unquote repositioning, if indeed it's a repositioning? But as you pointed out, there's some people who actually believe that the US is somehow trying to make amends with China. Why do you, give me your take on that. Let's start there first, and we can step into it.
Well, to be more specific, they think the United States is retreating from the Asia-Pacific region, which is the exact opposite. And if you look at what the US is actually doing, yes, they're moving troops around. Yes, it looks like they're pulling back away. But what did they do right before they struck Iran? They pulled all of their forces out of the range of Iranian ballistic missiles, and then they struck Iran. They weren't retreating. They weren't leaving. They weren't saying, "Oh, we're going to pull back and then we'll make a deal with you." There was none of that. They were getting ready to blow everything up. And when you light the fuse, you drop the bomb and you run in the opposite direction. That's not retreating. That's you getting ready to blow something up. So this is what the United States is actually doing. And I urge people to please read the policy papers. They have written in great detail about what we see the U.S. doing. What the U.S. is doing is a new military doctrine, especially for the Air Force. It's called agile combat employment. And what it basically is the knowledge that China has a very capable, immense ballistic missile arsenal. They can hit U.S. airfields at basically anywhere in the Asia-Pacific region. So what the United States is going to do to mitigate this is pull a lot of their resources away from directly in the firing range of the majority of these missiles. And then they're going to spread their forces out there. They are reclaiming, old World War II air bases. They're reclaiming them. They're building them up. They're making a huge web of airfields, small airfields, and they are dispersing their forces across all of them. And they just did this Cope Thunder exercise in the Asia-Pacific region. Again, not because they're getting ready to leave. They're getting ready for war. And this is how they imagine they will fight a war with China. And one of the things they practiced was agile combat employment, where they were practicing moving F-35s to the Philippines, moving from one base to the other, one airfield to the other. This has been going on since under the Biden administration. So this is already in the works for years. They're training airmen. You join the military, the Air Force, the Marines, whatever, you get one specialty. Now they are cross-training their airmen because they understand that if you spread out you had 1 or 2 major air bases, now you have 20. now you need 20 crews to service all of these aircraft. And because they can't do that, they're cross-training airmen to do multiple tasks outside their primary specialty, all in preparation for this type of combat. And so this is why I tell people to please read the policy papers. They explain to you what it is that you're seeing. You're seeing this, you're not a military expert, and superficially, it looks like the US is moving away from China. If you read the papers, they explain it explicitly. This is us preparing for war with China, not moving away from China. And what, let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Yes, the US asking Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, if there's a war with China, what are you going to do? Australia, what are you going to do? And people were also responding to this saying, see, the US isn't interested in fighting. These nations are allies with the US because they think the US is going to fight China for them, not the other way around. I'm just wondering, where did you get that from? Because in Europe, you know, the US is in Europe to protect Europe from Russia, but what's actually going on? We've used this analogy many times. The wood chipper is churning. Ukraine is being fed legs first into the wood chipper, and Europe is online behind them. And nowhere in sight is the US. They're not going into the wood chipper. They're the ones throwing one after the other into the wood chipper. Right. Look at the Middle East. Everybody said, Brian, are you crazy? Israel controls the United States. But we all saw with our own eyes who was being shot at with ballistic missiles for 12 days straight. Israel, not the US, not their bases. The US paid no penalty for that at all. That was their war. It was Israel. And in the Asia Pacific region, it will be all of these countries here in the region that are not allies, they're not partners, they have been politically captured. And that's why they do things that are irrational and contra their own best interests. When I say their own best interests, I mean the nations, the national interests of these countries, the administrations that are put into place, just like President Zelensky in Ukraine. He is just there to do whatever Washington tells him for Washington at the expense of Ukraine. And that is the same dynamic here in the Asia Pacific region. So people are saying, why would these countries go along with this? This is the reason the US politically captured them in the first place. It's the reason the US maintains a troop presence in Japan, in South Korea, and increasingly in the Philippines, also in Australia.
Do you think that those countries would feed themselves into a wood chipper against China? Australia seemed very dodgy about it. And I get the sense that the South Korean government, even though the military supposedly could be handed over to the US, I suspect that part of the rationale for them trying to put in a dictator was because they didn't entirely trust South Korea to go along with. Do you think that they would actually throw themselves into a Chinese wood chipper at the behest and dignity of the US?
I think there's a good possibility that they will. And of course, there are interests in all of these countries, like there are interests, circles of interest in Europe who don't agree with what is going on. And if they could stop it, they would, but they simply don't have the means to do it. Look at all the industry in Germany that is just falling apart now. These are special interests with tremendous wealth, and they have the potential for tremendous influence. And but they do not have the type of political control over even their own country that the US has. We've talked about this forever, about the National Endowment for Democracy, all of these institutions that the US creates, all of these programs. The European Union itself is a layered bureaucracy the US uses to politically capture Europe as a whole, with the individual nations consolidated under it. And so you have these big German corporations, but they don't have influence over the media the same way the US does. And I see that here in Thailand too. There are interests here in Thailand that do not want to be a US proxy, but they don't understand the full spectrum threat the US poses. The way they enter into a nation to politically capture it across the whole spectrum from, it's not just the US, it's military and the US government putting pressure on, say, the Thai government, or even just installing a client regime into power in opposition that they backed. They work their way into the education system. media. They don't just control what is on social media. They own the platforms that Thai people use for social media. So when you have this type of control over a country, even the special interest in that country, their ability to influence things pales in comparisons. This is why you see the US compelling nations to do things that are just completely contra their own best interests, self-destructive things.
Wow. Yeah, that's infectious. Like the NED, National Endowment for Democracy. I love the way they name these things. Democracy. It's just wild to me. And I think it was the Australian Prime Minister. He was in China, and people were thinking, well, Australia would never do that. I mean, he's in China right now trying to make this association between these two and trying to get closer. But, I was talking to Carlos Xia. Not Carlos Xia, I was talking to KJ No. KJ was like, dude, that doesn't matter. Like he was like, it doesn't matter that the Prime Minister of Australia is in China. Australia has had a history of siding with the United States in these military exercises. They're part of the Five Eyes. It may not be that simple. And so you might entirely be right. I mean, but they know that this is going to end up in a nuclear war, right?
It's just like Europe surely knew that going along with the US over the conflict in Ukraine, and they're still doing it. Surely they know this ends in disaster for all of Europe. It is happening right now before our very eyes, and yet they continue going along with it. There's no sign at all of opposition. And I constantly remind people that are inclined to believe that this isn't going to happen in Asia. It's going to happen in Asia just like it definitely happened in Europe. Before 2014, I remind people of this all the time. You had the Nord Stream pipelines were already in operation. Nord Stream 2 was coming online. There was all of this cooperation between Germany and Russia. Everybody was winning. Russia was selling its hydrocarbons and was trading and receiving products from Europe. Germany was getting cheap energy, so the rest of Europe was getting cheap energy. And then there was this growing cooperation with China itself. The Belt and Road Initiative was reaching all the way to Europe, and there were a growing list of European nations getting involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. And people said, there's no way they're going to go along with this. There's no way they're going to go along with the US starting a war with Russia. And yet they did, and they all went along with it. And they all play games where they say they're not going to. They're pretending that they're pushing back. They pretend that there's some sort of divide between themselves and the US, especially since President Trump came into office. But it is all theater. It's all for public perception management. And if you look at the policy papers, I heard Mark Sloboda, an excellent guest, by the way, talking about how he was almost tricked by Donald Trump.
Right. He's like, he almost had me. Yeah.
Yes, and how unpredictable President Trump is. And of course, his rhetoric is extremely unpredictable. But if you just take it and just sweep it off your desk, and you take the policy paper and you just look at that, you're not going to be surprised. There is no surprise because they have one plan, and this is what they have been reading from for decades, basically. And this is what they're going to continue to do. And the rhetoric is meant to distract you, to confuse you, to divide people against each other so that they can't unite and stand up to this policy that is going to destroy Europe and is going to destroy the Asia-Pacific region if it isn't stopped.
What is the motivation with this? Because certainly they have to be people who say to themselves, we're going to get hit. Like, for example, when I was having a conversation with people, I would say, but Israel knows it's going to get hit, right? Like, you can attack Iran, but Iran is not Syria. It's not, you're shooting dangerous babies in the back. This is a country with a proper military that has the capacity to hit you. It's like, have you ever been hit by a man in anger? Iran can hit you. And regardless of what you do in some kind of strike, your people will get hit. They have the capability of decimating your country. Yes, you have nukes, but they can also, take it as existential and just have no F's to give. And people would tell me, yeah, and they would give some kind of reason or rationale. Now, the reason I was having a conversation with people, because I was pointing out, it seems that Israel is about to attack Iran. And they were like, no, rationally, they wouldn't do that. It's like, no, they're going to do that. They're aiming for it. Everything that is coming out of them is saying they're going to do it. Why are you saying that they're not? And I think my argument or my question to them was, assuming they're going to do it, they know they're going to get hit. And I guess I feel the same way about Europe. It's like, yeah, you guys are feeding Ukraine into the wood chipper, but you're next. The U.S. has no allegiance to you. You're a vassal. And they, in order to maintain hegemony, will feed you into the wood chipper every bit as readily as you fed Ukraine into the wood chipper. And yet Europe will do it. Meaning there has to be some kind of rationale behind it. It has to go beyond some level of propaganda that is being fed to people for them to knowingly going to get hit. Certainly, Australia knows that China can reach out and pummel Australia. Certainly, Japan knows that China can pummel Australia again. What is the motivation to this? What is behind the scenes that is pushing and edging this policy that these countries know full well that they're going to get decimated, and yet they still whistling Dixie, go into the wood chipper?
Look at Ukraine. Why are they doing it? It's because the people that are in Kiev overseeing all of this, the people sending young Ukrainians, also old Ukrainians, off to go die by the thousands, it's never going to affect them. They are going to be the very last ones that pay any price for this. And they understand that once Ukraine collapses, they're just going to pick up everything they have and go. And it's not their problem. And this is the mentality people in Europe have. These are all rich, well-connected people. Whatever happens, it's not going to affect them. At least in their mind, this is what they think. I think this is what Germany probably thought during World War II. Yes, we're waging this war inside of Russia and across Western Europe, but it's never going to affect us. And this is the mindset that people have had all throughout history, a sense of impunity. And the United States, the people running the United States certainly have a sense of impunity. This is never going to affect us. We're in charge. We make the rules. And we make the laws, and the laws are there to serve us. We will never fall victim to them because we are the ones that made them in the first place. This is how they feel about all of this. But you do kind of sense a little bit of panic as well, because they see how things are kind of tilting. And this is why they're so desperate to stop this process, because if it tilts too far, that sense of impunity, well, actual impunity that they enjoy ends. And then they will be held responsible. Then they will be the ones that start paying the cost for all of this. But so far they haven't, and I don't think they will anytime in the near future. You know, the government in Israel, for example, do you think any of them actually believe something was going to happen to them personally? No, absolutely not. Were some of them even in Israel while this was happening? How would we even know? Well, we don't know. And someone like even President Zelensky, who is nobody, he is just there as part of the theater. He knows nothing is going to happen. They've told him nothing is going to happen.
Oh,
the Russians said nothing is going to happen.
Brian, I don't buy that part. I think they would string Zelensky up in a heartbeat.
Maybe some people inside of Ukraine would do this, but yes. I don't think you know the West isn't going to do anything. Russia has no reason to do anything to him because he's in charge of nothing. And he does what he's told. So as long as he does what he's told, and as long as he's worth more to the collective West's alive, then he will stay alive. But you know, there is this aspect where when you do outlive your usefulness, they will just outright kill you. They'll say Russia did it, and they don't care. And the problem is they pick people psychologically, people who are not very smart. They're not very capable people. Zelensky would never have been president of Ukraine if they didn't pick him and build him up. He was never going to achieve this on his own. People like that, the ego that they have, they can't see that they're expendable. They think they're special. They think history, the momentum of history is behind them. They don't see it. And we know people even in our personal life, just around us in our daily life, people were, not really in tune with reality and some of the consequences of some of the things that they're doing. So imagine people with this amount of at least perceived power, how they might be thinking. And that's who the U.S. picks to put in as these client regimes in Ukraine, all across Europe, in the Asia Pacific region. Until she was suspended, the prime minister here in Thailand. These are not people that would have gotten in on merit. They were backed and they were put there for this purpose. And in their minds, they think they're special. They always do, until they find out the hard way that they're not.
They're not. Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, people sitting at the table, they don't believe the table will get touched. You said that they were trying to stop the process. What do you mean?
Stop. Which process?
Well, you said that's why they're trying to halt the process because it doesn't seem like it's tilting in their direction.
Oh, the rise of multipolarism. If there is
I
a
see.
shift in the balance of power around the globe away from the collective West to a multipolar world where the US and its proxies don't get to do whatever they want consequence free anymore. If China continues to rise, if it irreversibly surpasses the collective West, if Russia is able to secure its borders and build itself back up, if Iran is able to do this, there will be consequences. There already, in many ways, are consequences, preliminary consequences the U.S. and its client states are facing as the multipolar world emerges. This is why they're starting to panic. This is why they're becoming more and more desperate. And I would say this is why they have been doing increasingly dangerous things.
Yeah. Basically, they see a multipolar world coming into fruition, and they're doing everything in their power to stop it. And they don't know how to stop it. And so they're beginning to get more belligerent and more aggressive in their actions militarily. Do you think there will be a war with China? That at some point, that they will, I guess Taiwan could be a flashpoint, but that Taiwan would ultimately be a flashpoint? Because I will tell you, the people who I speak to in China, they have a very different philosophy on this stuff. I'm an American. I was born and raised in America. My point of view is often geared around how America responds to conflicts. We would have never allowed U.S. troops to be in Taiwan if the U.S. was China. It would just never happen. We would have been perfectly willing to go to war to prevent it. And China, their thing is, we'll give it time. we'll let it marinate. We've been here for 5,000 years. Just let it happen. Just see what happens. Now, they would say, we're not going to allow this. This is intolerable. But there are already troops on the ground in China. I don't care if it's one. They're like 500, if not more. And they're continuously salami slicing the one China policy. And at some point, it will be a salami slice where they would say, hey, man, why are you freaking out like this? Missing the fact that there were, 1,000 other slices of that salami to bring you to that point where you finally have hit a red line. Give me your take on the way China is dealing with this, because I'm super curious on how you view it. Like, I'm saying this a bit weird. From China's point of view, the U.S. wants to drag us into a war. We don't want them to drag us into a war, so we're avoiding any and everything in our power to prevent us from getting dragged into a war. We know that the more time that goes by, we will be an industrial power well beyond what the U.S. can tolerate. So even though the U.S. is putting weapon systems in Taiwan, even though it's militarizing the Philippines, even though it's doing all these things, we're okay with letting it happen while we get far more industrially developed. But is that a right policy, though? Especially if the objective of these countries are, for all intents and purposes, getting more belligerent in their attempts to try to stop a multipolar war from coming to fruition. Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I think you're right about the point of view of China and how they feel time is on their side and how they're trying to avoid war at all costs. And this is what Iran was doing too. But look at what the United States did to Iran. At a certain point, the U.S. said, we're running out of time. We don't have any more time. It doesn't matter if this is ideal or not. We need this war to start. We need to kick things off and get things moving. And so they did. And so Iran ran out of time. And I don't think that they were fully prepared for that. I think for some reason they were taken by surprise. Again, that was on a policy paper. Literally everything that
Iran was taken by surprise. I'm sorry.
I think that they were. Somehow.
That is so frustrating to me, Brian, because my channel had been saying, like, they're going to get attacked. They're going to get attacked.
Yes. The policy paper for 16 years said, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to do it under the cover of negotiations. And every time the U.S. ramped up talk about negotiations with Iran, that was them trying to move things into position to kick off this war. And each time Russia, China, Iran itself would do things to raise the stakes and kind of push it down the road a little bit, which is exactly what China is also doing, by the way, to partially answer your question. This is what they're also doing. It's not that they're doing nothing. They are building out their military capabilities constantly to prevent the US from picking a time, even if it's a little bit premature, and saying, we're out of time, we need to launch this now. The Chinese hope that the Pentagon looks at Chinese military capabilities and say, not now. We need to catch up in this area or that area just a little bit more, and then let's revisit this decision then. This is what they were doing with Iran until they just decided to kick it off anyway. And I think that they're going to do that with China. And again, it's because if a war was launched between the US and China, or US client states and China, the United States would be, again, the very last one to pay the cost. The special interests in the US would be the very last ones to pay the cost for that war. And people have to understand, this isn't the US trying to fight and win a war against China off its own shores. They want to start a conflict. They want to raise the costs for China. They want to begin destroying Chinese infrastructure, but more than anything else, they want to start hitting Chinese maritime shipping around the rest of the world. And China doesn't have the capabilities to defend its maritime shipping all around the world. Their military is it's ironic because the West says China poses this global threat, but in reality, their military cannot project military power around the globe the same way the US can. Because the US can do that, this is one of their strengths they want to take advantage of while they still have it. And so this is why by the policy papers say they're going to do this. They are preparing to do this. They have reconfigured the entire US military over the last 4 to 8 years to do this. They're training US sailors, soldiers, Marines, airmen to fight this war with China. They're not doing it just for fun. They are doing it because this is what they plan to do. The only way it could possibly be avoided is if Chinese power was just so much more overwhelming that the day never came and China surpassed the West irreversibly to the point where the US said, if we launch this now, this doesn't even make sense to launch this now. So let's just, I don't know what they'll do at that point, but that's China's strategy. That's their plan, I think. They didn't call me up and tell me, but just looking at what they're doing, that's what they're trying to do. They don't want a war. War is bad for real business. For the U.S., war is business, but for everyone else that's trying to do something constructive around the world, war just topples everything that they're trying to build up. So they don't want it, and they will try to postpone it for as long as possible.
Well, that's the irony of it. Because you're right. Under normal circumstances, war is a destructive force.